Welcome to the Girlfriend God Podcast, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to follow it, rate it, review it, and share it with your friends. Now, together, let's find the divine. Today's episode is sponsored by New World Women.
Are you ready for a new world? Then it's time to check out New World Women. Lightworkers, changemakers, creatives, and spiritual entrepreneurs enjoy a like-hearted sisterhood and are creating a movement to create a new world. This is the time. Hi, I'm Dawn Morningstar, and yes, that's my given name, one of 3 co-founders of New World Women. I invite you to tap into the energy of a new world and come together with women who are supporting one another to live self-empowered lives of personal freedom, generosity, and service to an awakening humanity. Kelly, host of The Girlfriend God, is one of New World Women's founding mothers. So join with Kelly and women from around the world who know it's time for the energy of the goddess to reawaken in each of us. Check out the Women's Proclamation for a New World at bit.ly/NWWGFG. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/NWWGFG.
Okay, so welcome to another episode of The Girlfriend God, and today I'm very excited to welcome Ruth Barrett. Is it Barrett? Is that how you pronounce it? Not
Yes.
Barrett or
No.
not? Okay, just Barrett.
Yeah.
Great. She is an acknowledged feminist spirituality foremother, an ordained Dianic high priestess, a seasoned ritualist, educator, author, and a musician whose numerous recordings beginning in the 80s have been among the pioneering musical works in the U.S. goddess spirituality movement. She is the author of Women's Rights, Women's Mysteries, Intuitive Ritual Creation, of which I have a copy, and has contributed to other anthologies celebrating goddess spirituality, including Stepping Into Ourselves, an anthology of writings of priestesses, elders, and visionaries, foremothers of the women's spirituality movement, Female Erasure, What You Need to Know About Gender Politics, War on Women, The Female Sex and Human Rights, and Women in World Religions, Faith and Culture Across History. Ruth and her life partner, Falcon River, co-founded the Temple of Diana, and Ruth has taught at conferences and festivals nationally and internationally, and currently teaches online classes on a variety of witchy topics through her Temple of Diana branch, Guardians of the Grove. Welcome to the show, Ruth, and that is quite a resume.
Thank you. I made it short.
So one of the main reasons I asked you to come on the show was so that we could talk about Dianic Wicca, because we haven't really delved too much into specific goddess paths. We've talked about a lot of different goddesses and different cultures, but this is a very definitive path that's been around for a long time. And back in the 90s, early 90s, I guess, I was on a Wiccan path myself and was very drawn to Dianic Wicca. Over time, that has evolved into, I now call myself a monotheistic goddess worshiper, because there really isn't any other term to describe me, which is really just a culmination of various goddess paths, around the world, including yours. So I guess my first question for you is, what was the evolution of you before that? Like, how did you come to Dianic Wicca? Actually, first, we should probably talk about what Dianic Wicca is for anybody who's listening.
Yeah, I was actually going to suggest, okay, the most succinct definition that I can say about what the Dianic tradition of witchcraft is that it's a female and goddess-centered ritual tradition. It's based in the celebration of women's mysteries, female embodiment, and the values of what is now called, what is now called radical feminism. It used to simply just be feminism, coming out of the second wave, which have to do with the values of female autonomy and agency. And I think that's probably the most succinct thing. It is not only female centered, but it's also with Paula, with all of everything I just said, women only.
Right.
So it's exclusively for women because of our focus on women's mysteries and the female body as our home for what we do everything with, how we celebrate, what we honor. It's the focus. The focus is on women and girls.
Okay. So now, how
Yeah.
did you come to that? And who is the creator of Dianic Wicca?
So what Zuzana Budapest, Z Budapest,
Right.
who is she's still here, and she lives in California, Northern Central California. She would say that she has revived the Dianic tradition, even though people assume that she created it, but she does not use that word. She says, I revived it because women celebrating together exclusively with other women on a variety of rites of passage is ancient.
Right.
So that's not new at all.
Right.
That's possibly even some of the oldest kind of rituals that we know of around, especially around birth and menstruation and things like that. So she revived this female-centered, female-only way of practicing with women only during a time where second wave feminism, they're talking about, we give the date winter solstice 1971 as sort of an official date, because that was when Z Budapest is she's a Hungarian immigrant. She immigrated to this country and first moved to New York and then to California. And this is long before there was anything called a goddess movement, feminist spirituality, anything like that. And but second wave feminism, which at that time was focused on equal pay for equal work, reproductive freedom, those were the main focuses at that time, were very influential. But religion and spirituality was absolutely not on the table.
Right.
In fact, it was looked down upon because a lot of second wave feminism was informed by Marxist politics. Religion is the opium of the people.
Right.
And so things that were considered not about the hands-on, activism was considered a distraction from, our rights, getting into the streets and all
Right.
of that. So that timing was from the first winter solstice celebration held in West Hollywood, in an apartment in West Hollywood, in 1971. So we did a 50-year celebration a few years back, and then so over 50 years, we're moving along here.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question.
You did.
Okay.
So you yourself, on a personal level, what was the journey that made this particular path appealing to you? Did you have a spiritual life before? Did you have beliefs that you knew weren't working for you and needed to be discarded?
Sure. So I consider myself extremely fortunate in my background because I was raised in one of the founding families of the Jewish Reconstructionist movement. This was actually evolved to be a fourth branch of Judaism that came out post-World War II. And it was the founder did not set out to make a fourth branch. Right. Basically, the things he was talking about, this is a rabbi named Mordecai Kaplan. The Orthodox were burning his books. So it's like, sorry,
Right.
you got to do this in another playground.
Mhm.
Because he was really challenging the idea of a supernatural God,
Right.
and also even the concept of the chosen people, especially in the aftermath of World War II. Um, and uh, the God concept that was being articulated was more that God was the creative force in the universe that makes things happen. It was not ascribed a sex of the deity. And also it was and the values were advocating for the full participation of women in religious life. So, like, the founder's daughter was the first to have a bat mitzvah instead
Okay.
of this, rite of passage that was exclusively for males who became 13 years old and officially joined as an adult into the community. So that was, but the focus on ritual in the home was very, very strong. And my family was, we did home ritual, we did, synagogue ritual, we did a lot. And the focus, this is the thing that for me, was the most important. The perspective was that you don't just do something because it's always been done.
Right.
You have to make it relevant to the times wherein you are living.
Right.
It has to mean something, even if you need to give it a new meaning. And so, from you could say that Reconstructionism, in certain ways, is a philosophy you could apply to any religion. You need to look at the customs and the traditions and the values and the focus, and are they relevant? Are they still relevant? Does
Right.
this symbol still need to be around? I mean, unless you can ascribe a new meaning. And so I do take that philosophy into my teaching of witchcraft for sure, and my background in folklore um, is part of that. But at the time I was a child, the prayer books, which have since been changed, but at the time, they still had the male language. They still had, God as, king and master of the universe, these kinds of male pronouns for Yahweh.
Right.
And so
I always call that the guy in the sky
yeah.
mythology.
Yeah. And so I would, as a kid, I literally took white out and I went through the prayer books, and I moved all the male centered language from the prayer book. And my father, who was also a lay cantor, the cantor in synagogue life is the one who sings the liturgy.
Mhm.
So I definitely am a chip off the old block in terms of
Right.
the music stuff, but just in a different place.
Right.
But my father actually ended up joining the prayer book commission and being a part of changing all the language in what eventually, over a period of decades, they changed everything, and they made the language inclusive and more options based not the it took the forms that I would feel totally comfortable with. So I feel like I influenced my father in a good way,
Good.
and he went on to do some great work with others to make changes within the Reconstructionist movement.
Cool. So a guest who I've had on the show multiple times, who I've also become, we've also developed our own relationship and we've become friends, is Devorah Gren. Are you familiar
Mhm.
with her?
Yes, yes, with the Lilith Institute.
Yes, and
Yes, yes,
she and other women kind of reinvigorated the training of Jewish priestesses, of Kohanettes, and
yes,
that's why they founded the Lilith Institute. So that's
yes,
also kind of a reintroduction of a very ancient tradition to have these
Yes.
priestesses within the
Yeah.
Jewish religion. So
Yes.
just
Yes.
curious if you were familiar with her.
Yes. No, I actually took a wonderful class from her on Jewish amulets. It was, I really enjoy her work and her teaching. And apparently it's mutual because she said so. So we apparently are fans of each other.
Right, right. So from the time that you were young and you were already kind of imbued with this spirituality of looking for something in your life to which you could connect or
Oh, yes.
rely on or appeal
Right. So
to
let
for
so
help.
so I'll continue that thing what I did in the prayer books. What happened to answer your question? Um, I I started writing poetry to the goddess when I was 12 or maybe even younger. And it just made sense to me that if you're going to have a metaphor for the creator, that of course it would be female.
Right.
Of course. It would, I mean, as a kid, I'm going like, duh. Okay. And and I also noticed how when I would go into a building that's supposed to be the house of worship, flatline. I didn't feel anything, but I'd go outside and I'd look at the trees and I'd be out in nature and I felt everything.
Right.
And so I did announce to my parents at one point that my religion was nature, and then they thought I should have a conversation with the rabbi, who I also said, my religion was nature. And unfortunately, he what he was trained in to talk about prehistory was not what we know now.
Right.
Now there's information that's actually about more goddess civilizations. And before it was just like almost like all we know is that the caveman knocks the woman on the head and drags her off. We know, even though that's not true. Right.
Right.
But at the time it's like the stereotypes are there, and it's passed on as though it must be true. And that, so his reaction was like, well, ancient religions that celebrated nature, they sacrificed babies, and that was kind of like where it went. And I'm going, this doesn't make sense to me. So I ended up thinking I was creating my own religion. I just kind of went quiet with it, but kept on with my sensibilities. I also had been an avid reader of mythology when I was between the years 10 and 11 years old, because my family we lived in Israel for about 9 months, but we traveled around, and there was no television. And so guess what I did? I read instead of watching television.
Right.
And I sucked up everything. So I think that was also part of, just even though the Greek myths, we are reading the patriarchal, mythology
Right.
sold to us as the earliest stuff, of
Right.
course, at the time. It still resonated with me as having seeds of truth about some things,
Right.
including female power.
Right.
So
Well, I mean, if you know enough about ancient history, uh, you can see quite clearly the thread of patriarchal ways of thinking and patriarchal spirituality slowly overtaking and downgrading and
yes,
dismissing and marrying off goddesses and reducing
exactly,
them to,
exactly.
virginal
Mhm.
youths. And I mean, even if you look at just the sculptures of the Roman era, right? All the goddesses are young, beautiful, perfect bodies, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so you learned a lot through knowledge. And then at what point did you discover Wicca as a religion?
Well, when I was in middle school, and I grew up in West Los Angeles, and there was a shop called the Hermetic Workshop. It was across the street from what was a kind of a tourist area. Um, and I would go in there, and it was run by two sisters and they sold, potions and powders and candles and things like that. But all the books at that time, again, they were really pretty much ceremonial magic. They were very male centered and in their approach to power, of course. There was nothing. Later on, there was a store that was opened up by Dianics in Venice, California, called the Feminist Wicca. But that was later.
Right.
So I didn't. This is the thing about now, from the vantage point of where we are now, we can see that, okay, there's witchcraft, there's feminism, there's the ecology movement, there's this thing, which may not be called this anymore, but neo-paganism. There was all of these things that were not really blended or pollinated. New Age, Eastern religion, all these different things that were happening at that time. But it took time for things to sort of pollinate each other, where, oh, okay, this came in from there, this notion came in from here. Very American, in terms
Right.
of that smorgasbord, kind of thing.
Right. Right.
But but so I knew it was called witchcraft, but it wasn't what I know it to be now.
Right.
Okay. And so, I would do things. I bought a crystal pentagram. I'm a kid, and I was focusing on kids. I wanted to try to make them fall asleep in math class, which was not hard to do, but things like
Right.
that was what I thought it was, because that's all I had access to. And it didn't really fit who I was.
Right.
So it wasn't until I got involved. Um, I got involved in 1971. I got involved in what became, well, it was the Renaissance pleasure fairs. It was the Renaissance fairs that were the original ones, from which all the other ones that you see around the country
Right.
came originally from. And that was where a lot of folks who I would definitely call pagan. And also you have, again, when something is birthed, or a concept is birthed, and a new version of something is birthed, it comes out as something. It's not just pop, it's there. And so a lot of alternative thinking, a lot of folks were at that time in the 60s and into the early 1970s were concerned about how are we going to live together. There was, communal living, there was alternative ways of thinking. And so I think that the community that I was certainly connected with at the Renaissance pleasure fairs, I mean, I was still a teenager.
Right.
Okay. The only access I had to books that might have had anything to do with the goddess was The White Goddess by Robert Graves,
Mm-hmm.
which actually, what I found out about that through my friend Mark Simos, who is the brother of who is called Starhawk. So, because I didn't know her until later personally,
Mm-hmm.
but in other words, there were a lot of interesting things happening in Los Angeles.
Right.
So, the White Goddess, which of course is very hard to read unless you have like a brain this big and you have a lot of access to mythology and knowledge, but it still was an anchor.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the Jungians that were also really diving into different archetypes for goddesses, and that was very popular at that time. So there was, what's available to you. I mean, now there's so much. 50 years later, I mean, you can go, oh, everything's available. You can look here, you can look there, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But for folks, who were either born, even in the late 70s and the 80s. I mean, they were already, there was, by the time they were an adult and they want to look at this stuff, there's more now than ever.
Right.
So, but at the time, a lot of what was happening was I feel like she was going, like knocking on the shoulders and showing up for sure with me with music,
Right.
because I was studying, was doing a lot of traditional folk music, and with drawn specifically to what would be called the supernatural ballads in the English and Irish and Scots tradition and American tradition.
Mhm.
And when I would follow those threads of the symbols and the characters and the storylines, they always lead you to paganism. I mean,
Right.
you just go follow the thread. So that was always, and of course I'm having my own experience with my own truth about, the creator as a goddess, the creator as the all mother.
Right.
So that was happening. I did not, I brought up the Renaissance Fair as an important place in my own history for another reason, is because I met Shekinah Mountain Water there.
Okay.
Shekinah Mountain Water, who was not called Shekinah Mountain Water
Right.
at that time. We connected over music and magic and magical things. And I became a part of her first circle later in Santa Cruz, California in 1975 and in 76. And then I graduated from University of Santa Cruz, of California at Santa Cruz, focusing on folklore as an independent major. But my entire study was introduction to the Great Mother. I mean, it was, and how that was my excuse for doing all this research. I could do all kinds of stuff and
Right.
get a degree.
Right.
Okay. So, but even in the circle with Shekinah, we met every week for about 4 hours, literally in a round yurt up in the redwood forest, in the mountains of Santa Cruz. I mean, literally, I'd be walking into the witch's cottage, through the forest into, she called it the moon hut. And that's where she lived with her two children, who were amazing dancers and storytellers. And, this was the world, it was
Right.
this magical place. And then, but again, I didn't think of it as witchcraft.
Right.
Circling back to your question, it was goddess. But it wasn't what I had thought witchcraft was based on these earlier connections.
Right.
It wasn't until later, again, this cross-pollination thing
Right.
that began to happen. I met Z Budapest in 1970, later in 1976, after I moved back to California. And then I became involved with the Susan B. Anthony Coven #1, which was her group there. And then in 1980, she decided, well, before 1980, 1979, she was going to move, and she ordained me to continue her work that she had started in Los Angeles. And that was an amazing thing. I was ordained as a high priestess at the age of 26 or 27 years old. So it's been a ride.
Yes. Sounds like it.
And I think,
I have a lot of envy for the foremothers who are still with us, because you grew up in such an amazing time.
yes,
Things were,
yes,
even though these things are more available now, with the dawn of the internet and everything else, there's just, I think a lot of women seeking the goddess suffer from information overload, right? Because there's so
yeah,
much out there, and
yeah,
you don't know how much of it is legitimate, or who has who
yeah,
like, made up their own thing versus,
right,
who
exactly.
has a degree in classical mythology versus, who's trying to start a cult. You know what I mean?
Oh, I do know. I do. I think it's, I agree with you completely. I feel very fortunate that I got to live that time
Right.
and I got to live those experiences. And what I also want to just say to women who maybe were born later, who are kind of in the in the place where you're talking about, where all they know is the internet and all, really check into people, definitely do not assume what they're saying, you know
Is
do some
correct by any means.
by any means. And if
Right.
someone says that they're, the witch queen of the universe or the witch king of the universe, run
Mm.
like hell. I mean, it's like
Right, right,
right. But it is, you don't know that, we can look back and go, oh, this was the trail, because, like I give a talk literally on this history, from my point of view of having lived it, a few times a year. But you don't know you're making a movement when you're in this process. It's
right,
only in retrospect you're looking back and go, oh, okay, I see this is how it happened.
right, right,
You just take, and that, but that was also part of the magic of the time. You just, like, the next step was simply you took a next step.
right, right.
There was no map, there was no guarantee, there was no, you were, but it's not just me. I mean, this is what women were doing. We were following, I really feel like Goddess was just wanting us to save her, and therefore really calling her daughters,
Right, right,
like, the resurgence of the Goddess to human consciousness became a focus for
right.
us in many ways, in creative ways.
So for myself and in my own path, part of the reason I mean, I was a practicing witch for a long time, and I mean, I would still consider myself a witch, but I don't do nearly as much ritual or spell casting or whatever as I used to, simply because my own spirituality has evolved to the point of like my daily life is in service to the goddess.
Yeah, sure.
And uh so first of all, so I tried to be just a generic pagan for a long time, but pagans almost exclusively are polytheistic, and that isn't how I felt. I mean, and those are recent, like relatively recent developments, like within the last
Mm-hmm.
7 or 8 years,
Mm.
for me, after, dabbling in this, that, and the other thing. And of course, in the beginning, I was, and I think most people are, very, very structured and very, I learned how to do this from this book, and that's the way I do this, and that's always the way I'm going to do that. Like there wasn't really much room for
Mm.
evolution because I was relying on the knowledge of my, like anybody else interested in Wicca in the 90s. I read Buckland's Book of Witchcraft and learned about Gardnerian witchcraft,
Mm.
all of those things. Um, but like I said, after becoming less formal about it and placing myself in that generic pagan category, I was really uncomfortable with polytheism. And so today I talk about what I call the diamond head God theory, which is, and I use God as a generic term.
Mhm.
Um, I regularly, I mean, I like saying goddess because I like the
Mhm.
way that kind of feels on my tongue. But
Mhm.
if I happen to say God in a conversation, I still mean the goddess.
Mhm.
And so this diamond head theory is that, there are hundreds of thousands of goddesses in the world over different time periods and across cultures. And I believe that those are all facets of the goddess, like
Mhm.
the OG goddess, right?
Yeah,
And
sure.
and for me, having some sort of patron goddess is my way as a human being to form that a personal relationship between myself
Yes.
and the goddess.
Yes.
Because the one true goddess is somewhat unknowable to me, right?
Yes.
Beyond my human intellectual
Yes.
understanding. So I need this patron goddess to I resonate with iconography, and I like having, little statuettes to carry in my pocket, these little touchstones. Like I have to put intellectually, I understand that the goddess is truly neither male or female, this non-physical entity, but as a human being, I need to assign a gender to her. I need to imagine what this goddess would look like in human form so that I can more
Mhm.
easily relate. And and what witchcraft itself as a movement kind of fell out of favor for me because I kept finding so I was born in 72. So I'm, in that
Mhm.
generation that has both, right? Like I remember when you had to go to the library and look in, reference books and write reports by hand.
Mhm.
But I'm also around for the dawn of the internet and what
Mhm.
it's become.
Mhm.
So what I was finding because especially living in the Midwest in Champaign, Illinois, which is a college town, so it's a
Mhm.
liberal town, but like it's still the Midwest. I mean, there's not a witchcraft shop here. It's still a largely Christian area. It's so most of my connecting took place online and in things like
Mhm.
Facebook groups
Sure.
and all of that, uh, which I grew accustomed to, right? I used
Mhm.
to think you couldn't create that kind of meaningful space digitally, but
Mhm.
experience has now taught me otherwise,
Mhm.
right? It's still
Yeah.
not the same,
Right.
but it is because energy has no geographical limits,
True.
right? If I'm in
Yeah.
circle with you
Yeah.
online, just because you're in Michigan and I'm here doesn't
Mhm.
mean there isn't an energetic flow.
We have been able to do online seasonal rituals since the shutdowns,
Right,
that
right.
and then of course I started doing teaching online that I never ever thought I would do because I how are you supposed to do that over the internet,
Yeah, right, right,
and all of that. But it is been very interesting. It was a silver lining, certainly for many of us, to be able to connect in the web,
right.
with this tool. I was smiling. You probably saw me smiling when you're talking about your, goddess concept with the diamond and stuff. I literally almost verbatim is exactly what I talk about and write about.
Oh,
So I was like going, yeah,
hey,
yeah.
Kismet, we're on the same page.
We are definitely on the same page, and the only thing I would add, because that happens to be my perspective personally, what you were talking about, as a teacher, who works with women from all over and all over the world. We have these conversations in my, especially the first class series I do, feminist witchcraft in the Dianic tradition, and we have a whole session of who is the goddess, and it's and what's important, I think, in terms of there's two things I want to get back to saying. But the thing about religion, um because this also is a religion, is that there are religions that are orthodoxic, which is it's really important to believe a certain thing, and it's very,
Right,
rigid and held. And then there's this orthopraxic. It means it's more important it's what you do. That's the most important thing. And
right,
most religions are a combination along, in these in between.
right,
Some are more this, some are more this. And certainly I would say with Dianic tradition, we're definitely orthopraxic. No one is going to ask you in a circle like, well, what is your goddess concept? No
mhm,
one cares. No one cares. You
right,
can be, it's like what's important is that we're together and we're celebrating this aspect of nature, and the overlay of the female life cycle with the cycle of the earth, which is how I teach the tradition, bringing in a lot of knowledge from Shekinah Mountain Water into Dianic tradition.
right.
But um, I forget now the other thing I wanted to say, but it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I would also add that not only is what we do what's important, but I would say that how we feel is equally important,
Yeah.
right?
So
Because in my pursuit of developing this personal relationship, and that's where I was going earlier, which
Mhm.
the reason that witchcraft kind of fell out of favor for me and being in these all these groups online was because, especially in the last decade or so, there's been such an emphasis on witchcraft as power. And I'm all for women's empowerment, right? And being able to own your power. But to practice this path solely as a means of exerting power and, even if you're following the, let it harm none rule, if it's all you're using it for,
yeah.
I didn't see any religion in that. I didn't
Mhm.
see any reverence.
Yeah.
And for me, reverence is a
Yeah,
big part of the deal, right? Like most of
exactly.
the women that I talked to that practiced witchcraft, the word worship was a totally foreign concept to them. And I'm
That's
like,
really
how are you not
sad.
getting that these gifts that you have and the things that you can accomplish through witchcraft, like that didn't come from you, that is
Right.
a gift of the grace of your
Yes,
goddess. And
exactly.
yet you pay her no homage. You know what I mean? So I got very frustrated with that.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. That is not my
It's not your jam, right?
it's
And
not
I've since found other women that,
yeah, I mean
that
I think that also the I mean the reason I was never attracted to mainstream I'm saying mainstream witchcraft traditions that are first of all the basing the tradition on the duality was not my thing either
right,
my focus, but also the one of the things, I mean, Dianic tradition is very eclectic. So when I talk about it and the way that I've been a part of it since it was sourced from 1971. I've been around the longest, and the women who've been, practicing from this original point. Um, it's very much about feeling. It's very much about reverence. It's very much about improvisation. It's very much about letting the ritual breathe. It's not about first you turn to the right and then you do this thing and then you did. I mean, that to me is like Christianity or some
right,
kind of, that is not freedom
right,
of the creative flow that she is given us
right,
to express ourselves and to honor ourselves and each other and her. We come from her. I
right,
mean, how could we not be honoring her with every day, thank you and,
right,
blessings and acknowledgement? I mean,
right.
so I don't know. I don't know. I can't speak to those other things you have discussed because I never went there, and I can understand why you would be turned off, to be blunt. So,
Right, right,
I mean, I've certainly read and I know people who are involved in other traditions. Many of them have been friends over the years or elders, in those traditions, but it's not, this is also the beauty of is to find what works for you and find what resonates with you. But I remember the thing I wanted to mention that when you were talking about, yes, we need to, we're human and we need to, we think in metaphor. We can't help it.
right,
It is how we're wired as human beings. And it's also, I think, our superpower. I mean, there's so many things about how our minds work but also what we need in order to convey a concept. And so for me also, we could certainly have a discussion that do we need to assign a sex to a deity when we're talking about the cosmos and this, but to not assign uh, for me she is all, and she's the all mother, and she's
yeah,
the word I use to talk about everything. She's all
right,
that is. Okay. Because everything has a mother source. Again, I'm using a metaphor to
Right.
talk about the creator in this way, but it's also based in truth,
Right.
in that a male does not give birth to anything.
Right.
There is, you can't find it in nature that that is true.
Right.
So I have to take that on faith because there isn't anything natural about it. The female of the species gives birth to life. We live on a female planet and everything goes back into the earth when we're done. Okay. So the metaphor of she, which includes the word he, if you want to get technical about it.
Right.
Okay. So it's that to say she to talk about, all that is, it's, it works metaphorically, but it also, the other aspect is political
Right.
because if you start, there are other spiritual traditions in the world that honor nature, and there's no name, no sex assigned to what that is. When you say she to talk about those things or to talk about God or to talk about nature, in the history of patriarchy, anything can be God but her.
Right.
The minute you say she, you are in another place, even though, like, people will say, yeah, I use the word God to talk about everything you're saying, but I use the word God. And I say, great. Then why don't we use the word goddess instead for the next 5,000 years
Right.
and see? And then they go, oh, no, 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 no. I can't use that word. Then I'm going, busted,
Right.
busted.
Right.
Okay. It reveals the inherent misogyny and also the politics of our sex.
Right.
Anything can be God but her. Anything. So
Right.
when you say she and when you say goddess, you are, I think of it as a both a personal metaphoric reality and a political statement.
Right. Absolutely. And when I say I use those terms interchangeably, usually that may be for the sake of convenience, just because I don't want to open the can of worms that
Sure.
with a particular person or group or organization
Absolutely.
or whatever.
Oh yeah, of
Um,
course. Of course.
but in my private life and in my prayers, I certainly use the word goddess.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a while, a couple of years ago, I tried to get a Church of the Goddess off the ground, and I developed what I called Shiism, which is more of a philosophy than a religion, but
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to share that with you because
Oh, please do.
think you'd be tickled, and I think it would probably resonate
I'm
with
sure it
you.
would.
Because I found myself in the dilemma of because I was raised Catholic, I'm a recovering Catholic, as many of us are, and but something that I missed about, yes, I get and I agree with nature is my church.
Mm-hmm.
However, we know from gathering in circle that there is something to be said about being in a specific place at a specific time
Mm-hmm.
and developing the kind of energetic history of a place, just like people do in a church,
Yes,
right? So
that's
there's
right.
something about the and as far as different strains of Christianity, Catholicism is heavy on ritual, right? You've got the smoke, and
Yes.
the incense, and the standing, and the sitting, and the procession, and the but those were the things that I liked about the religion that I was raised in.
And
So,
they got it from the pagans.
right,
Sorry, I have
right,
to just interject.
right, right. So I had this whole pie in the sky dream about opening a church of the goddess and having them all over the world and having a ritual space in the basement and but sadly that has that has not come to pass. But maybe it's just germinating for somebody else to pick up
Sure.
that cause, after me. I don't know. Um, so I got to tell you, Ruth, you're really making me want to align myself with Dianic Wicca and give myself yet another label. So I'm going to have to go back and explore
Mhm.
your website a little more thoroughly
Yeah,
if I can,
sure.
because I've been very busy, so I've been a little lax on my spiritual life lately. I'm sure you know how that is.
Well, the thing is, if you don't find something that resonates with you, it's great that you know that. You know,
Right.
it's a good thing. I think it's important that we practice discernment.
Hmm.
That just doesn't sit with me. And have it really be okay that it doesn't sit with you. This
Right.
is to me the beauty of the diverse ways of practicing.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I kind of forged my own path. I
You,
did a series called Priestess
mhm.
at the Altar, where I think I did 10 episodes and uploaded them to YouTube because I found myself missing what was essentially the Sunday morning sermon of my youth. And I wanted that. I wanted to be preached at. You know what
Mhm.
I mean?
Yeah,
And I couldn't find that. So I thought I can't be the only person that wants this. So I'm going to record 10 episodes of this Priestess at the Altar, which is essentially a Sunday morning sermon,
mhm.
if you will.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I try and create things, one for myself, but also because I always feel like if I am desiring these things that I'm not finding, I can't be the only one, right? I can't be the
absolutely,
only one.
absolutely. Do you know Ava Park?
No.
Ava Park. Well, Ava Park is the center holder for what was actually a long time standing until the shutdowns, brick and mortar Goddess Temple of Orange County. In the middle of conservative Orange County, California,
Right.
was this stunningly beautiful physical space. And Ava specifically, she's wonderful, and she actually did the thing you're talking about, a place where women could go on Sundays, and who that kind of but besides the holidays,
Right.
but a regular thing. And she does a lot of talks, and you should probably look her up because you might enjoy her sermons,
Okay.
and on various topics.
Cool. Cool. Yes, I will definitely be looking into that.
Okay.
So, so I have a specific question about Dianic Wicca, which is why Diana of all the goddesses in the world?
Mm-hmm.
Why that?
Well, there's a history to that. Um, I mean, Diana was a goddess that you probably know was named in the Middle Ages. Long time for you know. There were other Dianic traditions named because of this association with the Middle Ages. Was the so-called goddess of the witches. And in Italian witchcraft, of course, in Strega, you have Diana and her daughter Aradia. There's this whole other, type of Dianic something there.
Mhm.
Um, I wish it wasn't Diana. I wish it was Artemis because, but we kind of got stuck with it. Over the years, women would say, "Why don't you change you know, all I can say is, we know Diana is the Roman name for who the Greeks called Artemis.
Right.
We're really, really, truly about Artemis, all about Artemis. I don't even think about Diana as a goddess because Artemis is like the coolest thing ever, and she, and she is really. But the reason she was became almost a symbol in a feminist spirituality in the past, especially in the early 80s, was because she did represent um, a female person, and also the goddess being whole unto herself, autonomous. She wasn't then married off to this one and this
Right.
one and this one, and she represented female autonomy. And so she became symbolic for women seeking personal liberation from the way we have colluded with the values of the dominant culture, with patriarchy, and also because she is nature herself, because she is, if you could imagine, again, this personification of the wild, she is a female figure that has never known bondage. She has never had a muzzle on her mouth. She's never had blinders put on her. She is free and she is connected to the natural world. So she really is, and there's so much more to her as I've been learning. I highly recommend the work of a fantastic Artemis scholar who I think is probably the foremost scholar for Artemis is Dr. Carla Ionescu.
Carla and I knew each other for a long time, and yeah, she's in a number of episodes. She's co-hosted a number of episodes, so I'm very familiar with Dr. Dianescu.
Yeah, and so she's really done a lot of work to uncover more about who she is, and Artemis really was the all mother. I mean, she really was. She wasn't relegated to, only, running around with her bow and arrow and her, which is also the hunter, the huntress. That's all good.
Right.
And that has a definitely a resonance also, but she was a lot more than that.
So it's kind of an out of left field question, but I'm sure that it's something that you've been asked a lot. Can you speak to, I know over time there's been controversy about Dianic Wicca being limited to followers who were female at birth.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So transgender women, not
right.
Okay. And in this current climate,
oh yeah, sure,
that's something that's been brought to your attention before.
I'll say. I'll say, yes.
And you're not the first organization to run into that, right? With the same thing with the Michigan Women's Festival.
Of which I was a part of for 30 years. So, but what I want to say about it, and really, no one's against anybody.
Right.
What it is that the Dianic tradition that is female focused, female centered, about female embodiment. We're talking about the body.
Right. Right.
Therefore, it's not about them. It's simply not about the journey of a male-bodied person or a male-bodied person that is seeking a female identity. Right. And so it's not against anyone. This is so much misunderstanding here and so much violence, really. And it's just not the work that we do is by and for women and girls.
Right.
Girlhood is relevant. It's not this, girlhood is not just, oh yeah, thing you bypass. And part of it is not only the female embodiment piece, but also we have these bodies in a culture that is woman hating.
Right.
That teaches us that we're not okay. That teaches us to hate ourselves because we are female, hate ourselves because we have a female body. And so we talk about what's real, everything from sexual violence that we encounter, the sexism, all the things.
Right.
These are not separate from our tradition. We deal with these things in the context of our circles, in the context of our personal work. It's simply not about the male journey. In the same way, it's not about the seasonal journey of the god in the wheel of the year. It's not about his journey. We focus on her journey.
Right.
So, but from a male-centric perspective, you can look at what we do and go, they're not balanced. Because they don't have, where's the guy in the room,
Right, right,
and but from that perspective, they get to have that perspective. We all get to have our perspectives. I
right,
respect anyone's right to have their own spiritual orientation.
right,
And let us do what we are here to do. Where our focus is on women, women's journey in patriarchy, women's journey through our lives to find our joy, to heal, to celebrate ourselves apart from a man in the room.
right,
It's not personal about them. It's just that it's not about them.
right, right. I understand what you're saying. I just figured it's probably been a topic as of late. And
It's been a very rough ride.
yes.
It has
And
been a
and
very rough
that's a
ride.
question that listeners would ask. Um
Yeah.
so
I think that I also discern that there is, when I use language, I talk about sex, meaning the physical body, and gender stereotypes and gender characteristics as
right,
not the
right,
same thing. I don't
right.
use them interchangeably.
Interchangeably. Right,
Yeah.
right. I so want I want trans women. I want someone in the trans women community to desire a spiritual life and find some sort of patron shape-shifting goddess. Surely there's one out there. You know what I mean? That they
This
can
is
resonate,
this
that
is
resonates with them. And
yeah.
there are probably transsexual women um that already have that kind of spiritual experience, right?
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
But just like
That'd be an
us,
interesting study.
it would. However, just like we had to find our way,
Right,
and finding our way has been really precious,
right, right,
right? And it's like um I feel like that journey in and of itself leads to whatever the meaning is that that person wants,
right.
ultimately. And so it's not for me to design something for
Right,
that person. It
right,
is for them. It's just like this. I mean, honestly, the same conversations it was very similar decades ago about why don't you let men come into your rituals,
right,
males. And it's like, because it's not about them.
right,
That was the same. It's the same. It's the same response.
right,
But and you know what? I know that you suspect we have these wonderful things, which we do. You need to find, I don't speak your language.
right,
We have different cultural experiences. We have based on the bodies we have.
right,
Therefore, you really do figuring it out is part of what makes it meaningful and important.
right,
And I wish that for everyone. And so my, everything I've been saying here on your show um, has caused really interesting responses. I'm not a part of the larger pagan community as a
right,
result of it. And because it is not physically safe for me to be there, I
right,
never ever thought that this would be it would be okay in a larger pagan community to want to harm people who
right,
think differently, given how diverse our community was. And
right,
we used to value those differences,
right.
and now we don't.
Yes, I see. Yeah, I could see that.
And I remember for decades, I mean, I hung out with so many elders that are now elders in different pagan, uh, orientations. We hung out together. It was great. There was no
Right,
hostility. And
right,
it was like, and there was an appreciation for something called men's mysteries. And there was
right,
some, and there was, and respect for women's mysteries. It
right,
was understood that the mysteries of the sexed body were sacred, and there's separate initiations based on the body you have, because we don't all have the same experiences.
Right.
And there were times to come together, and there were times to do things separately. And that seems to have really
Vanished.
utterly eroded. If you
Right.
really mean the body and not the idea of a body.
Right. Right. That's an important distinction.
Yes.
So I was wondering, so aside from the Dianic tradition, the only other kind of, I guess what I would consider established, like well-established path dedicated or under the name of a particular goddess is and her name is escaping me, Sarita, I can't think of her last name, but who started the tradition of Hecate and founded Hecate's temple in New York.
I don't know her.
Okay.
All I know is that's ironic. I have a song I wrote that's on, Spotify, which is the most played thing on called Hecate. And
Oh,
I anyway, it's the one that gets like 8,000 hits a month or something.
okay,
I don't
okay.
know why. Anyway, there are many temples dedicated to different goddesses where the
That's
focus
true.
where,
That's true.
Certainly Bridget,
Right,
has there's a lot of organizing around that particular goddesses. And I think that's great. I mean, I think it's, again, women are wanting a certain focus, and
right,
that's what they're doing. And, you know, bring it on,
right. And that's well, I guess that one came to mind in particular because they have a brick and mortar structure at this sanctuary in New York.
Ooh, good. Ooh,
Um,
fun.
and part of the work that I do is I spiritually counsel women. Not that I mean, I'm not a licensed therapist or anything like
Mhm.
that, but based on the practices and procedures, if you will, I guess, that I've developed for myself, I take women through a 6-step process to help them either get back to the relationship that they had with the goddess, or if they're new on the goddess path and they're just trying to find their way. A lot of the work that we do is identifying for them who their patron deity is.
Mm.
It's what I call the goddess Holy Trinity, which is the goddess, right?
Mhm.
The creatrix of all
Mhm.
that is and all
Mhm.
that ever was, and then the patron deity, and then you. That's
Yeah,
for me, that's the Holy
yeah.
Trinity.
Sounds
So,
wonderful.
because I like using, since I have such this emphasis on reverence, I use words like worship and holy and you know what I mean? Because I think part of our movement is
Yeah.
claiming these words that by definition fit our needs, but over time have become so associated with patriarchal religion. Like most
Right.
women, no matter how long they've been on a female spiritual path, you say the word holy and they're like, what? What do you mean holy? Anyway,
Wow. Well, we use it
I went
all
off
the
on it. I went off on a
no,
tangent there.
I agree with you, and we use that word all the time. And
I
reverence, you
I
know.
I wrote an
Yes.
article that's on the feminism and religion blog
Oh,
called
uh-huh.
Making Room for Reverence, where I
Ooh,
talk
good.
about
I'm
this
gonna have to look it up.
specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to send you a link to that.
Oh, please do.
But anyway, so I help women because women choose patron goddesses for, well, I mean, one
Mm-hmm.
could argue that we don't choose them, they choose us,
Mm-hmm.
which has certainly been my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I also heavily emphasize that just because you have a patron deity today, it doesn't mean that's the one that you're not chained and bound to for the rest of your life. You can change patron
Exactly.
deities as your needs change. And it's always interesting to me to see
Mm-hmm.
what direction they're drawn in and why.
Mm-hmm.
And lately, I've worked with several women who resonated with goddesses based on their ancestry. And I
Mm-hmm.
had a little bit of that myself, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is interesting because
Mm-hmm.
your ancestral spirituality is something that I don't think we thought much about before the last 2 decades or whatever. uh,
It
after the dawn
matters.
after the dawn of ancestry.com and all of those things, and
Right.
this information is widely available to us now. Do you find that is there a piece of that um in your own spiritual life? Like, do you feel particularly connected to goddesses associated with, wherever your homeland is or where your people are from?
Mhm.
Do you find that to be
I
true?
think it certainly can go that way, especially our ancient ancestors.
Right.
And when I talk about the ancient ancestors and our ancient mothers, interestingly enough, like this we're doing a. I'm not going to mention the date because it's not going to happen. Your podcast is happening after the fact, but there's a really amazing holiday called Mother's Night. It's the night before winter solstice, and it
Right.
is it is it comes out of the Norse, the heathen tradition in particular, but it's such a Dianic holiday. It literally is about it is about reverence for our ancient mothers, not your grandmother, great grandmother, great great grandmother. We're talking about the the first woman in your line that gave the womb, that gave birth to the womb, the womb, the womb, the womb, boom, and here we are sitting here.
Right.
Okay, so these are about the ancient mothers in the Norse. They call them the Disir.
Hmm.
I think it's actually the word descendant even comes from that word. um there's a lot to that, but anyway, we're doing a whole 2-hour class on Mother's Night coming up this weekend. But anyway, um the I have always resonated with a lot of the Celtic goddesses as
Hmm.
well. I have zero anything Celtic. Through all the ancestry stuff,
Hmm.
I'm Eastern European. But then if you're Jewish, there's a whole other layer of complexity to this.
Right.
Okay. But if you take your genome from your any ancestry.com or 23andMe, and you upload it to this site for free. It's called mytrueancestry.com. It is all DNA that's based in archaeological sites around the world.
Wow. I'm gonna have to check that out. What is it?
So
Myancestry.com?
my true
Yeah.
ancestry.com, and that knocked my freaking socks off.
Wow.
Because I thought I'm going to do this because I'm looking for this Celtic connection. I do Celtic music. I do Celtic. There's certain things I spiritually resonate with.
Hmm.
Um, and I go to Greece every year. I take women on a goddess pilgrimage.
Hmm.
Um, and we go to Crete and we spend lots of time in Crete.
Hmm.
Um, well, I find out I have DNA on Crete in several places on Crete and ancient Greece, and from the Minoans, Mycenaeans, Hellenic Greek. I mean, I have it shows me a little, and ancient Anatolia in Turkey. I mean, 4,700 years ago.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, so all of a sudden, I started looking really much more interesting to myself than a solid donut of Ashkenazi Jewish,
Right.
where it was only so much that was solid donut. Now it was like, okay, look at all of, I mean, I'm not being disrespectful to my heritage. I'm just saying to lead up to that, there's
Right.
all this other really interesting stuff, and it was very insightful. And because Artemis really is, um, I really resonate with her. I
Hmm.
think it takes a lot of time to really get to know a goddess.
Right.
It could be a lifetime or more to even learn about one, and have her actually learn about you too.
Right. I always say your relationship with the goddess is like any other.
It,
If
right,
you're
it's
interested in
mutual.
somebody, uh, how do you form that relationship? Well, you spend time with them, you get to know them and let them get to know you. You make it a priority. You know what I mean? And all these
Yes, I
same things
do.
apply. Um, but the women I work with who haven't defined a path for themselves, I tell them the most important thing for me is whatever it is that you believe in, do you feel loved?
Mm,
Do you feel loved?
mm,
Because that's key for me, right? I had
mm,
to undo a lot of,
mhm,
again, being raised in Catholicism. And it's not even like I was raised in a strict Catholic household,
mm,
but it was enough just to be exposed to that kind of culture. I had to undo a lot of beliefs about things like judgment and a system of punishment and reward and all of those things. So, what I wound up wanting most from a higher power
mhm.
was to feel
Love,
loved.
right. Well,
And I think that's
mothers
key.
love their children.
Right, right,
If they're healthy and not mentally ill.
right.
Okay.
And love so unconditionally,
Yes. Yes. And
right? Like
I
when I
wish that
hear
I wish
people
that for
say,
everyone.
when I hear women say, I said a prayer, and in my prayer I apologize to the goddess for whatever, and I'm like, you don't need to, you don't need to apologize, you don't need to ask forgiveness,
Mm-mm.
you don't, because she
Hmm.
doesn't judge you.
Hmm.
And
It's not a Christian
they
concept.
go, she doesn't, and I'm like, no.
No. I think that in studying about the goddesses, it's important to know for women who are again, what did God mean growing up to you?
Right,
Because if you think that you're applying the same things around judgment,
right,
around, oh, my relationship with all that is conditional.
right.
No,
No.
no. And if you but to train, like you're saying, if you to train out of that is a process.
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
process. And I think of it, look at the gifts she gives us.
Right.
Look at the opportunities she gives us. This is how I know that by virtue that I am here, what am I going to do with what I know and what I believe I'm here to do?
Right.
And that to me is how you return if there's going to be any kind of a reciprocity, is to serve her in sacred ways, um, that make the world a better place. And that to me is what I do. That's
Mhm.
my commitment.
I heard a long time ago, and I wish I could attribute this quote to somebody because as an author and an academic, I think you should cite your sources, but I don't. But unfortunately, I don't know who said this initially. But I once heard, and I have replaced the word God with goddess, which is who you are is the goddess's gift to you. Who you become is your gift to the goddess.
I love it.
Which
Yeah,
I really like, right? Because
that's
I'm
right.
always
That's
still
right.
a work in progress, right?
Yes.
And but
Yes.
I mean, spiritual work is hard. Developing and maintaining that relationship is hard. It takes years, it takes practice, it takes dedication, it takes prioritizing your spiritual life, which I personally don't think enough people do,
I
but
don't think so. I
that's just
and I
me.
think part of that process is to heal from uh the ways that the dominant culture has affected you,
Right,
and how it has affected your own self-concept.
right, right,
Because if we think for a second that we are not touched by what has our family history, the culture and the messaging that is happening 24/7, then we are really being ignorant
right, right,
voluntarily. So part of this, being here to be who you are, and do what you can to make the world a better place, is alongside the self-healing and the self-care, and
right,
recognizing, how do I oppress myself?
right,
Where did
right,
I get that? you
right,
know and to be able to name it what it is, so we can begin to heal. And I use, as a ritualist, I help women learn how to create rituals for themselves. I'm not a cookbook, uh, I don't do cookbook rituals. I
Right.
actually
Right.
helped. I have specific, processes of helping them find out what they need and
Right.
to create the ritual for themselves that
Right.
they need.
I've always been a fly by the seat of your pants ritual creator for myself.
Mm.
Not necessarily in circle with other women, but
Mhm.
yeah, if I have a means to an end, either something I want to accomplish or something I definitely need help with that's affecting me in a negative way, which is usually when I create some sort of
Mhm.
ritual.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm all about do what feels right for you. It's a very intuitive process for me. Um, but I still do my research, right? Like I want to know if I'm making a magic bag to carry around in my pocket,
Mhm.
what is the crystal that
Mhm.
resonates with whatever it is I'm trying to achieve? What is the crystal?
Mhm.
What is the herb? What is the scent?
Mhm.
What, you
Mhm.
know what I mean? What
Sure.
is and I guess it's kind of snobbish of me to say so, but I guess I wish that research were a bigger part of other people's spiritual lives.
Well, I think that,
Because I do want to
yeah,
come as close as I can to how did they do it originally? How was this god?
exactly.
What were the rituals that worshipped this particular goddess
What did they do? What did
10,000
they do?
years ago?
What did they do and why did they do it?
Right.
I really work with my students to think about those things. To
Mhm.
don't just accept something because it's just, well, that was just what they did. Why do you think they did that? What were there's so much and I think because I folklore is in my background, I want to know those things. I want to know where things come from. Because if I'm going to, I think that if the point of ritual is to make a connection or magic or spellcraft, if you're not really connected with, I think, the meaning or the reason, how can you be as effective as you hope to be?
Right.
So it doesn't even make sense to just, oh yeah, let's just look up in the book of 2000 spells and like do this thing.
Right.
When I Now, you, if you know more, you can look at a spell in a book and go, oh, okay. And in fact, I do work with students on literally on spell deconstruction. Like, look at this, what's right about this and why? What is magically unsound about this and why?
Right.
And
Right.
to so that you can actually use, you're not just being a rote following blindly something that someone else wrote down because they just probably either made it up and you're not them, so they're meeting their needs,
Right.
but that may not be what you need
Right.
because you're not them.
Right.
So that, anyway, I come from that place also.
Well, Ruth, I could talk to you for hours and hours
I
and
think
hours.
so.
Um, and perhaps we will again at some
Yeah.
point in the near future.
Mhm.
Uh, but I think we need to wrap this up. But if you've listened to the show,
Mhm.
you know that at the end of the show, I ask all my guests the same three questions.
Mhm.
Are you ready for that?
Okay.
Okay. The first question is, tell me something about yourself that people would be surprised to learn. Usually something quirky. Like my example is for myself, I like to take black and white photos with an analog camera in
Mm.
cemeteries.
Mm. Um, my first musical influences were Shirley Temple and Anne Margaret.
Okay, that is a perfectly good answer. And not something I would have thought of.
No.
Okay. Second question is, what is your current favorite television series? And if you don't watch TV, tell me what you're reading right now.
Um, I really enjoyed uh, the Discovery of Witches, Shadow of Night, uh, Book of Life series that Deborah Harkness did.
Okay.
Um, the books on tape version is really excellent.
Okay.
I the TV version, I kind of, it was okay. It was, the books were so much better, and
They always are.
they always are, because no, this is not what Matthew looks like, and it's just like no. Yeah, I listened to that book, or I've read that book probably at least 15 times through
Okay.
all three. I think that the way that magic is discussed is very much aligned with what I understand about magic and energy. So I really enjoy that. And I just think it's a great story. Fantastic story.
So not a big TV watcher, no guilty
I
pleasure.
do. I've been watching uh Bridgerton.
Okay. Okay.
Totally like real.
Total escape.
I like costume dramas that are not violent.
Right. So does my wife.
Yeah.
I myself haven't watched Bridgerton, but she has.
Well, yeah, it is if you can hang in with there long enough, you'll understand the writer, who's clearly a feminist, but when you're watching this going, oh my God, I can't believe what women have to go through, she's doing it on purpose to show
Right.
you. Okay.
Right.
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 Okay.
Okay. And finally, if your life were a movie, what would be the theme song on the soundtrack?
Wow. I don't know if I can answer that in this exact moment. I just know the first thing that came into my mind was the song I would want played at my funeral or memorial, but that's not the same question.
Okay.
So maybe I'll reserve that for later when I'm actually
Okay.
closer to death.
Okay. All right. Well, when you
Yeah,
have an answer, let me know, because I do
yeah.
maintain a playlist on
Uh-huh.
Spotify with everyone's answer to this question,
Uh-huh.
which, as you can imagine, is a very eclectic list.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I would really that's a good question. I'll have to think on that.
Okay. Okay. Well, I have really enjoyed talking to you, Ruth, and I'm so glad that you were able to come on the show. And in a couple weeks, I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
have your partner on as well,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to talk
Yes.
about, I titled the episode Womanizing the Runes.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be an
Mm-hmm.
interesting conversation as well.
For sure.
Um, I have a feeling you'll be hearing from me sooner rather than later, just because you've made me think about a lot of things, and I feel like I'm missing some sort of structure that I need. You know,
Mhm.
I always fall back into being a solitary practitioner, but then I'm like, oh, I wish I belonged to something, So, but until then, as always with my guests at the end, I wish you peace and the love of the goddess.
Thank you. And to you.
Okay, Ruth, I will be in touch. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Take
Okay,
care, Kelly.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching or listening to The Girlfriend God. Don't forget to like, rate, review, subscribe, follow, and comment. Episodes drop every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and you can follow The Girlfriend God on social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.